Today's Talk About It Tuesday question is, I just looked at the will I wrote 20 years ago. I've since been divorced. My children have grown up. I sold the house listed in the will and bought another one. How often should you update your will, and what happens if you don't? This is a great question, and it is a common error that occurs that people do not update their will. But let's just back up. It takes a lot for people to write a will in the first place. I guess it reminds people of their own mortality and they don't want to deal with that. But the reality is, if you do not have a will, it causes major problems, major confusion, court battles that can last for years. Probate court can last for years before things are settled. So it is important first, if you don't have a will, that you take the time to write a will. So what is a will for? What is the primary function of a will? One, it lays out very clearly what your wishes are for the distribution of your assets. That's critical. Who gets what? How much of whatever it is they get? It makes it very clear how you want your stuff distributed. Two, it names a guardian for any minor children. If you and your spouse, or if you're a single parent, pass away, if you and the spouse pass away at the same time, or both parents pass at the same time, who would you like to have guardianship of your children? It also names the executor of the estate. Who is responsible for carrying out the wishes in your will? Who's in charge of all of that? So if you don't have that, the courts will figure it all out on their own. And I don't think you want that. So what happens in a situation like the questioner, where you have assets that no longer are in your ownership that are in the will? Nothing with those. But what happens to the new assets that you own that are not listed in the will? They will go through probate. The court will decide how to distribute those assets. So they will decide who can get it, how much of it they can get, if it has to be sold, right? The courts will make that decision. You don't want that. What happens if the executor dies? You don't have a named executor. Again, it's going to go through probate. What happens if you have an ex-spouse or a deceased spouse as the beneficiary, or anybody who's a beneficiary who's a deceased person? Again, the courts are going to start deciding what happens. So it is important, and those are common errors. Your relationship changes with the person you named that you want to be the guardian, right? You don't want them to be the guardian anymore, but the courts are going to go by the letter of the law. They're not going to say, oh, well, maybe she didn't want them anymore. The court's going to decide your ex gets the house because that's what you said in the will, and that might not be your wishes, but the court has to go by what you left in the document. So it goes back to the question, how often should you update or review? So every 3 to 5 years, as a general rule, you should be reviewing your will and all your estate documents, right? Because all your financial documents have a beneficiary named, right? Your retirement account usually has a beneficiary named. If you have a trust, you want to make sure that who the beneficiary in the trust is, who you want it to be, right? So every 3 to 5 years in general, you should review your estate plan and make whatever adjustments are necessary. But also any life changes that occur, major life changes. If you get married, you might want to update the will. If you get divorced, you definitely want to update the will. If you have children through birth or adoption, right? You're going to want to change your will. Probably want to change the will and make them the beneficiary of something. If you move out of state, because each state has a different format for a will, so you might want to change that if you move out of state. If you sell assets that are listed in the will, if you gain new assets that are not listed in the will, All right, so all these major changes, immediately you should be updating the will. But in general, every 3 to 5 years, because again, you don't want your family to have to fight it out and figure it out. You don't want someone to inherit something that you have when you no longer have the same relationship with that person. You don't want mass confusion and, this everybody's saying, I don't know, I think she meant this, or she told me this, or he told me that. And I'm sure that's what he really meant. And I should be getting this. You don't want that. You don't want that. You don't want to leave a mess behind for people to have to untangle. So as a general rule, every 3 to 5 years, but if there's any major change, immediately. But if you don't have a will, get on it right away because it's the same issue. If you have a will, make sure you've looked at it and you update it to meet your current wishes. So please like, share, subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments on this or even your horror stories, right? What happened? I know there are people who their mother or their father passed away and that person's ex got stuff that I'm sure they didn't want them to have, and they've told me about it. So if you have a horror story you want to share, please share it so someone can learn from it. But please like, share, subscribe, keep the questions coming, and I'll see you next Tuesday.